Changing Times Media, exploring new ideas that have the power to change the world.
Good morning and welcome to the Freeman Michaels Show here on KKZZ 1400 AM. This is Ventura County's #1 positive talk radio station. And today is Inspiration Thursday. But we're going to do things a little different because I've brought in my inspiration for a whole new branch of my work. Joining us today is Mark Robert Waldman, who is the author of 11 books, including How God Changes the Brain. But he has created an amazing program. In fact, we're working potentially together to create our own version of this, having to do with weight, having to do with eating issues, and the patterns of behavior that are associated with that weight, which is very close to what I do. But he comes from the neuroscience perspective, and we're talking today about retraining your brain. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me again.
I'm so thrilled to have you back. And what has been so fascinating is both the conversation we had on air, but also some of the conversations you and I have had off air. And I came to a lot of conclusions that I didn't try to find the science for them. I was really working intuitively. I was working for myself. As you know, I have a 100-pound swing in my adult life from my low weight to my high weight. And clearly food and the patterns around the food, the eating habits, were my way of coping with stress and anxiety and maybe feelings as well. It was my coping mechanism. And I knew that I had to do something. I had to interrupt those patterns, and I had to create new patterns. I call them practices. But I wasn't necessarily trying to, track what was going on neurologically. So what's been so fascinating about meeting you and getting to know your work is that though we come at very similar conclusions, we come at them from very different perspectives. And let's start with stress.
Yes.
Stress activates an area of the brain, and I'm going to let you correct me if I get any of this wrong, because again, you're the neuroscientist and I'm not, which is known as the amygdala, or it's actually commonly known as the reptilian brain. This is the sort of fight or flight mechanism.
Yeah, the whole limbic area, if you make a fist, that's the center part of your brain, and then you just take 4 sheets of paper and plaster that over the top, and that's your new brain, your neocortex. And this is limbic reptilian brain, in which the amygdala, by the way, amygdala in Greek means almond. So it is that part of your brain that literally makes you go nuts.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. No, that's great, because that is what it is for me.
Yeah, I want you to keep that in mind, because there are so many things we do that stimulates the amygdala, that makes us go nuts. And stress is one of those things. So that anytime we feel stress, some part of our center part of our brain says, my life is in danger. I need to do something to soothe. And surrounding that amygdala is a part of the brain called the reward system. I'll just use a general term for that. And we have to do something to stimulate that reward system, because that's telling the brain and the body that everything is okay. Something soothing is coming in. The stress is going down. And because when we're very young children, for many of us, eating tends to be a soothing modality.
Yeah.
When we're young, we only have one word. Ah!
Right.
So
right.
And the parent has to figure out what that is. Now, I think my mother, all the time, every time I made a noise and complained, she just thought it meant I was hungry.
Well, I think a lot of parents do that.
So she fed me and fed me and fed me. And so what would happen in my very young brain at the age of 1 year old, I'd form a behavior, a neurological pattern, a memory, that when I'm stressed out, put food in my mouth, and that will probably, at the very least, calm down my mother. So if my mother is more calm, I will feel more calm.
That's interesting. What you just said is very interesting. So this is kind of a placebo reaction. In other words, it may not be the food that was actually causing you to calm. It may, in fact, have been that your mother had an answer to your upset, and that her calming may be what you were picking up on.
Yeah, a lot more than placebo. Because every infant needs to know that their mother is calm. An infant uses the anxiety of their parents to ascertain whether the world is safe or a threat.
That's brilliant. That is really brilliant. Okay, but let's talk about this this fist-sized amygdala part of the brain. In fact, we can even call it the old brain, can't we? Because this is from a evolutionary standpoint.
Hundreds of thousands of years old, yes.
Right, hundreds of thousands of years ago, this was our brain. The fact that we've developed the neocortex, or the new cortex, the new part of the brain, that allows for, different kinds of choices. So that fight-or-flight mechanism is a survival component.
Yes.
And this new brain allows us to actually make a choice other than simply from the standpoint of survival.
Our new brain allows us to do a lot of fantasies. It allows us to create pictures of all kinds of things that other, your lizard just isn't sitting back and having any dreams that we know of.
Right.
So it allows us to think, to feel differently, to imagine, and it allows us to motivate ourselves in ways that are quite creative and other animals can't do. So we can use our imagination to change our behavior. And when we change our behavior, we change the neural structure of our brain. By changing that, we change the way in which we move our face and our hands and everything else. We become a unique creature because of our imagination.
Okay, now we have to stop for a minute because I have to take a snapshot. There is I'm going to call it a new paradigm in neuroscience, in science in general, which suggests that we have a heck of a lot more influence on our experience, on our physiology, based upon similar things to what you're working with, which is certain patterns of thinking establish certain behaviors,
yes.
And we have the ability to make a choice. We call this consciousness, right? We call this the ability to make a conscious choice versus unconscious. The amygdala, fight or flight mechanism, unconscious. Much of the behavior is simply for survival. It's where we go, knee-jerk reaction, and yet the opportunity, and I'm going to use the language even, this is often called neuroplasticity. It's the it implies the ability, that we have the ability to actually change our brain.
It means our neurons are growing at one end of a neuron. I want you to imagine this stem, kind of like a tree. And on one end of the tree you have these little branches coming off and leaves growing on it. And those are axons. And from the tip of those leaves come all the different neurochemicals that communicate to other neurons. At the other end of this tree is the roots. And there can be 10,000 of these little tiny roots, and we call those dendrites. And so one single neuron is picking up information from as many as 10,000 other neurons. It's consolidating that information. It's deciding, okay, I like this piece of information, this part's useful, this part is a waste of time. And then it reacts to that and it decides what information to send out through those 1,000 axons at the other end to other neurons. But these roots and leaves, they're growing all the time. Sometimes the leaves are falling off. Sometimes the roots are growing more dense. Your brain is reconnecting every hour. It's a different connection. It's a whole different experience.
Right. And what it's sending out, now I'm wandering again into your territory, it isn't necessarily mine, but this is my understanding of it, is these neurotransmitters, these messages, ligands. They're
neurochemicals.
Neurochemicals.
Let's keep it simple.
All right, very good. Thank you. Woo. Neurochemicals, the message is sent out, and everything is sort of receiving messages, reacting to messages. This is where we have a spike in blood pressure, or we have a physiological experience in reaction to the thought. Just the thought can trigger an experience, right?
There are literally 10,000 thoughts going on, perhaps every minute, perhaps even every second in our brain. And consciousness is just like the head of a pin inside of our entire brain. So we're only aware of 1/billionth of the amount of thought that's going on at any one time. And that's what we work with. But that little pinhead, that little bit of consciousness we have, can do something remarkable. Because we can take that little bit of consciousness, and those neurons can grow axons all the way back into the other parts of the brain. No other animal can do this. And that's why we can take a single piece of imagination and we can change behaviors that have been built into our brains for millions of years.
Okay, now what is exciting about this in the world of weight, because this again is my field and you've jumped in with both feet because you recognize that there is a very real, very tangible, very provable potential solution to obesity based on retraining the brain. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
We pretty much eat like reptiles. We're eating from our limbic brain. We're using behaviors of eating and food selection based from things from 250 million years ago.
Right, right. And in fact, our eating may be driven by stress hormones. We have stress. The fight or flight mechanism says food is safety, food is sustenance, food keeps us alive,
yes.
or comfort, or whatever it is. And we automatically, unconsciously go to it. That's
yes.
what that binge, drive, craving thing is.
Yes.
And but I don't know what the right conjunction is, but there's this opportunity through consciousness, through a practiced response to the stimuli that causes stress that can interrupt that process, correct?
Yes, and the problem is that the stresses that we are feeling and experiencing day to day now have nothing to do with lack of food.
Right.
So we feel stress, our reptilian brain simply says, we're starving to death, or it's raining outside, or somebody's attacking us. None of that's true. There's a grocery store down the street.
Right.
So we have to actually build a whole new neural circuit saying, the stress that I'm dealing with is brand new. It's never existed before. My brain knows nothing about it. The primitive parts of my brain will probably never know anything about it. But I can take this speck of consciousness and say, this is a new stress. Let us not use the old behavior of stuffing our face simply because our boss is yelling at us.
Yes. Okay, great. Now, the piece I
And by the way, when I say boss, I mean our spouse.
Right. Of course, the real boss. We know who the boss
real
is.
boss.
Of course, that's true. Fascinating. All right, I think I know what I want to ask you. Well, let's go ahead and there was a conversation you and I had, and I feel like I want to have it now.
Yes.
So I'm going to track back. I was discussing with you. I had heard an interview, and there's a book out by Mario Beauregard, who's a neuroscientist out of the University of Montreal, who did some really interesting studies with the Carmelite nuns, and he was able to show that because of their practices, their spiritual practices, be it prayer, meditation, it's actually kind of a combination of both, that they actually were able to grow a certain part of their, can I say brain?
No, the most important part of the brain, the entire neocortex, those 4 sheets of paper that you put over your fist, got thicker.
Got thicker, right. So that allows them a greater capacity for, is it choice?
Not only a greater capacity for choice, but it adds years onto your life as well.
Right. And so this is counteracting stress hormones. It's counteracting those responses from the fight or flight type of brain.
This is the first information ever. I mean, it's a brilliant study. It's very important to show that you can actually arbitrarily over, well, for the Carmelite nuns, perhaps it took them 20 years, but if we begin early enough to train ourselves in these deeper contemplative practices, that we can grow some of the most important parts of our brain more than the average individual.
Okay, this is exciting. So we have the ability now to, because of the technology has demonstrated, and maybe intuitively a lot of people knew this. Look, people who meditate, maybe they're Buddhists, maybe they're Carmelites, they have a kind of calmness, they have a kind of non-reactive ability to make, better choices or whatever it is. But
you can consciously choose to build any reality that you want.
Yes.
That's what it tells us.
That's what it tells us. And I come at that, by the way, with a master's in spiritual psychology. This is, in fact, something I've come to understand, but from a very different vantage point. What is thrilling to me is how you and Andy Newberg and other people whom you work with have actually been able to show this with brain scans and the putting of the 2 and 2 together and actually taking the good science and saying, here's what we know, how do we build on that? How do we take this and create a new paradigm, and specifically around, I know the industry is called weight loss, but I call it, of course, weight release, this idea that we actually have a say in our experience. We are not victims of our genes necessarily, though some people may have a genetic abnormality, but that's very
Environment
rare.
now trumps genes.
Yes.